Millionaire is abandoned by his wife. On the same day, he had an accident. But 3 years later, when she returns to visit him, she is shocked by what she just witnessed. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Hamilton estate in Chelsea, London. Alexander Hamilton stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, admiring the meticulously maintained garden below while sipping his perfectly brewed Earl Grey tea. At 42, he had achieved everything society deemed worthy of admiration: a successful chain of luxury hotels across Europe, a beautiful wife, and a reputation as one of London's most respected businessmen. The sound of heels clicking against the hardwood floor announced Victoria's approach before she appeared in the doorway, looking immaculate as always in her designer outfit. Her blonde hair was styled in elegant waves, and her makeup was flawless, a perfect match for the sophisticated image they presented to the world. "Darling, don't forget about the charity gala tonight," Victoria reminded him, adjusting her diamond earrings. "The Petersons will be there, and you mentioned wanting to discuss their property in Monaco." Alex smiled, taking in his wife's beauty. After 15 years of marriage, she still took his breath away, even if things had become more routine than romantic lately. "Of course I remember. I've already had Thomas prepare the contracts for preliminary discussion." Their life together was a carefully choreographed dance of social events, business meetings, and maintaining appearances. The Hamilton name had become synonymous with luxury hospitality, and Victoria played her part as the perfect hotelier's wife impeccably. Yet lately, Alex had noticed subtle changes in their relationship. The way Victoria's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, how she spent more time at her charity committees, the growing silence during their intimate dinners. That evening, as they prepared for the gala, Alex watched Victoria through the mirror as she applied her signature red lipstick. "You've seemed distracted lately," he ventured carefully. "Is everything all right?" Victoria's hand paused momentarily before she continued her precise application. "Everything's perfect, darling. Why wouldn't it be?" Her tone was light, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Alex couldn't quite decipher. The drive to the venue was quiet, with Victoria focused on her phone, occasionally smiling at something on the screen. Alex made a mental note to plan a weekend getaway, perhaps to their villa in Lake Como. They needed time away from London's social obligations to reconnect. The gala was held at the Royal Lancaster, one of their competitors' properties, but Alex had to admit they had done an exceptional job with the decoration. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom, and the soft strings of a quartet provided the perfect backdrop for networking. James Cooper, a prominent real estate developer, approached them almost immediately. "Alex, Victoria, wonderful to see you both." His handshake was firm, but Alex noticed how his gaze lingered on Victoria a fraction too long. Throughout the evening, Alex found himself occupied with various business discussions, particularly with the Petersons about their Monaco property. Victoria circulated the room independently, as she often did at these events, charming everyone with her presence. It was only later, when he caught a glimpse of her in deep conversation with James Cooper in a quiet corner, that a slight unease settled in his stomach. The next morning, Alex had an early meeting at his flagship hotel in Mayfair. The Hamilton Grand stood as a testament to his vision, a perfect blend of classical British architecture and modern luxury. As he reviewed the quarterly reports in his office, his mind kept wandering to Victoria's distant behavior and the way James Cooper had looked at her. His assistant interrupted his thoughts with a gentle knock. "Mr. Hamilton, your wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." Alex picked up the phone, hearing Victoria's slightly breathless voice. "Alex, darling, I need to cancel our dinner plans tonight. There's an emergency meeting for the Children's Hospital fundraiser that I simply can't miss." He felt a familiar disappointment settle in his chest. "Of course I understand. Will you be home late?" "Most likely. Don't wait up." The line went dead before he could respond. Looking out over the London skyline from his office window, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in his perfectly constructed world. He had built his empire on attention to detail and the ability to anticipate problems before they arose. Yet somehow the most important aspect of his life, his marriage, felt like it was slipping through his fingers like grains of fine sand. That evening, instead of heading home to an empty house, Alex decided to drive to their newest property development site in Richmond. The spring evening was unusually clear, and the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As he navigated through London's evening traffic, his mind wandered to the early days of his marriage to Victoria, when every moment together felt electric with possibility. His Range Rover purred along the A4, and he barely registered the increasing speed as his thoughts consumed him. The last thing he saw was the glare of headlights coming around the bend, far too fast, far too close. Then, in a moment that would forever divide his life into before and after, the world erupted into a cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass. The perfect life of Alexander Hamilton was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The steady beeping of medical equipment filled the private room at London's Wellington Hospital. Victoria Hamilton sat beside her husband's bed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the armrest of the designer hospital chair that Margaret, her mother-in-law, had insisted on bringing in. Alex lay motionless, connected to various machines, his once commanding presence reduced to this silent figure in the stark hospital bed. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about his survival, but clear about the challenges ahead. The accident had left him paralyzed from the neck down, unable to speak due to the trauma to his vocal cords. They couldn't say for certain if the condition was permanent. These cases were always uncertain, they explained in careful, measured tones. Richard and Margaret Hamilton had practically moved into the hospital, taking shifts watching over their only son. Victoria observed their unwavering dedication with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. Her own dedication was already beginning to waver, though she tried to suppress the guilty thoughts that crept in during the long, silent hours. "Victoria, dear," Margaret's voice broke through her reverie, "why don't you go home and rest? You've been here for hours." Her mother-in-law's concern seemed genuine, but Victoria detected an undercurrent of judgment in her tone. "I should stay," Victoria responded automatically, though the thought of escape was tempting. "He's my husband." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Yes, and he would want you to take care of yourself. Richard and I will be here." Victoria's phone buzzed in her handbag. Another message from James. She'd been avoiding him since the accident, but his messages had become increasingly frequent. The last one had reminded her of their conversations at the gala, of the possibilities they had discussed, of the life she could have beyond being Mrs. Alexander Hamilton. Standing up, Victoria smoothed her skirt and gathered her belongings. "Perhaps you're right. I'll go home for a few hours." She leaned down to kiss Alex's forehead, a gesture that felt more performative than genuine. The drive home in her Mercedes felt like an escape. Once inside their Chelsea townhouse, Victoria poured herself a large glass of wine and sank into the sofa, finally opening James's messages. "I know this is complicated, but we need to talk. What we have is real." Her fingers hovered over the phone's keyboard. Before the accident, everything had seemed so clear. James had offered her excitement, passion, and a chance to be more than just a trophy wife. Now guilt clouded every thought of him. The doorbell's chime startled her from her contemplation. Opening the door, she found a young woman in practical clothing, carrying a professional-looking bag. "Mrs. Hamilton, I'm Emily Bennett, the private nurse the hospital recommended. I'm here to discuss Mr. Hamilton's home care requirements." Victoria stared at the woman. She couldn't be more than 30, with warm brown eyes and a gentle demeanor that seemed at odds with the clinical nature of her profession. I wasn't expecting you today. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton Sr. arranged the appointment," Emily explained patiently. "They mentioned they'd informed you." Of course they had. Victoria vaguely remembered Margaret mentioning something about home care arrangements, but she'd been distracted thinking about James's latest message. "Yes, sorry, please come in." As Emily walked through their home, making notes about necessary modifications for Alex's care, Victoria watched her with growing unease. The young nurse's practical assessment of their space highlighted just how dramatically their lives would change. Their elegant townhouse would need to be transformed into something resembling a medical facility. "The master bedroom will need significant modifications," Emily explained, her voice kind but professional. "We'll need to install ceiling hoists, adjust the bathroom facilities, and create space for medical equipment." Victoria's wineglass trembled slightly in her hand. How long do you think he'll need this level of care?" Emily's expression remained carefully neutral. "That depends on Mr. Hamilton's recovery. These cases can be unpredictable, But with dedication and proper care, many patients show significant improvement. The word dedication seemed to hang in the air between them. Victoria took another sip of wine, avoiding Emily's gentle gaze. "I understand this is overwhelming," Emily continued softly, "but it's important to remember that with support and love, patients often exceed medical expectations." Victoria's phone buzzed again. James asking to meet. The contrast between her current reality and the life she'd imagined for herself became suddenly painfully clear. "Will you be his primary nurse?" Victoria asked, trying to focus on the practical aspects of the situation. "Yes, if you're comfortable with that arrangement. I specialize in rehabilitation care for trauma patients." Emily's competence and quiet confidence were somehow both reassuring and unsettling. After Emily left, Victoria found herself standing in their master bedroom, looking at the space that would need to be transformed. The elegant furnishings they'd chosen together, the artwork, the luxurious fabrics, all would need to be replaced with medical equipment and practical innovations. Her phone buzzed once more. This time she answered, "James, can we meet?" The next day, Victoria arrived at the hospital later than usual. She found Emily already there, efficiently checking Alex's vital signs while speaking to him in a warm, encouraging tone. Though he couldn't respond, Victoria noticed how his eyes followed the young nurse's movements. Margaret sat in her usual chair, knitting what appeared to be a blanket. "Good morning, dear," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Emily has been showing us some communication techniques we can try with Alex." Victoria nodded, suddenly feeling like an outsider in her husband's hospital room. She watched as Emily demonstrated a simple system of eye movements for yes and no responses, her gentle patience in stark contrast to Victoria's growing restlessness. Later that evening, as Victoria sat in a discreet wine bar in Kensington, waiting for James, she made a decision that would alter all their lives. She couldn't be the devoted wife nursing her husband back to health. She couldn't sacrifice her dreams and desires to become a caretaker. It wasn't the life she wanted, not the life she deserved. Looking at her reflection in the window, Victoria barely recognized herself. The perfect Mrs. Hamilton was disappearing, and in her place was a woman on the verge of making a choice that would ripple through all their lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. 2 months had passed since Alexander Hamilton's world had been irreversibly altered. The pristine walls of their Chelsea townhouse had been transformed with medical equipment, and the once peaceful sanctuary of their master bedroom now hummed with the quiet persistence of monitoring devices. Through it all, Alex remained trapped in his own body, his mind as sharp as ever, but his voice silenced, forced to communicate through a complex dance of eye movements and facial expressions. Emily Bennett had become a constant presence in their home, her gentle efficiency bringing a strange comfort to the sterile atmosphere that now pervaded the space. She arrived each morning at precisely 7, her warm smile never wavering as she went about her duties with practiced grace. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," she would say, her voice carrying the same cheerful energy whether it was a good day or a challenging one. "Shall we start with your exercises?" Alex had grown to appreciate these morning routines. Emily's hands were strong yet gentle as she helped him through his physical therapy, her encouragement unwavering even when frustration threatened to overwhelm him. She had an intuitive way of reading his expressions, understanding his needs often before he had to indicate them through their practiced communication system. Victoria, meanwhile, had become an increasingly rare presence in their home. Her visits to Alex's room grew shorter and more perfunctory, her discomfort evident in the way she hovered near the doorway, as if afraid to fully enter this new reality. One particular morning, as Emily worked through Alex's range of motion exercises, Victoria appeared in the doorway, dressed for what was clearly not a hospital visit. "I have a charity committee meeting," she announced, adjusting her designer handbag. "I probably won't be back until late." Emily noticed how Alex's heart rate monitor showed a slight increase, the only outward sign of his inner turmoil. She continued the exercises, maintaining her steady rhythm as she spoke softly to him about the morning news and the weather forecast, anything to distract from the sound of Victoria's heels clicking away down the hallway. Margaret Hamilton appeared later that morning, her arms full of fresh flowers for Alex's room. She had taken to visiting daily, often bringing small touches of comfort and normalcy to the medicalized space. Emily watched as she arranged the blooms in a vase, noting how she spoke to her son about family matters and business updates, never seeming to mind that he couldn't respond verbally. "The board is handling everything beautifully, darling," Margaret assured him, arranging the last stem. "Richard says the new property in Edinburgh is exceeding all expectations." She paused, glancing at Emily before adding more quietly, "Though we do miss your touch with these things." During their lunch break, while Emily was preparing Alex's nutrition, Margaret approached her in the kitchen. "How is he really doing?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern. Emily carefully measured the prescribed supplements before responding. "His physical progress is slow but steady. The neural pathways are showing signs of regeneration, though it's too early to make any definitive predictions." She hesitated before adding, "His emotional state is more complex." Margaret's face softened with understanding. "Victoria's absence affects him deeply, doesn't it?" Emily nodded carefully, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her growing personal concerns. She had witnessed too many of Victoria's hasty departures, seen too many of Alex's silent reactions to his wife's increasing distance. Later that afternoon, while Emily was reading to Alex from the Financial Times, a daily ritual they had developed, she noticed his attention drift to the window. Following his gaze, she saw Victoria's car pulling into the driveway, but instead of coming inside, Victoria remained in the car, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. "Would you like me to call her up?" Emily asked gently. Alex's left eyebrow twitched slightly, their signal for no. Emily continued reading, but her attention was divided between the financial report and the reflection of Victoria's car in the window. After several minutes, the car pulled away without Victoria ever having come inside. That evening, as Emily prepared to leave for the day, she found Margaret in the kitchen, staring into a cup of tea that had long gone cold. "She's changed so much," Margaret said quietly, not looking up. "I remember when they first married. Victoria was so different then, so full of life, so devoted to Alexander." Emily began organizing her medical supplies for the next day, unsure how to respond to such a personal observation. "You're very good with him," Margaret continued, finally looking up. "He seems calmer when you're here." "It's important to maintain a positive environment for recovery," Emily responded professionally, though she couldn't deny the warm feeling that spread through her chest at Margaret's words. As she drove home that evening to her modest flat in Battersea, Emily found herself thinking about Alexander Hamilton's expressive eyes, how they followed her movements around the room, how they lit up when she arrived each morning. She thought about the small victories they celebrated together, a stronger muscle response, a clearer communication signal, a moment of shared humor over her terrible attempts at financial jargon. She also thought about Victoria's increasing absences, the whispered phone conversations, the lingering scent of wine on her breath during her brief appearances. Emily had worked with many families in similar situations, had seen relationships strained under the weight of catastrophic injuries, but something about this situation felt different. In the silence of her flat, Emily opened her patient notes, intending to update Alex's progress report. Instead, she found herself staring at the blank page, her professional detachment wavering as she recalled the way Alex's eyes had followed his wife's car as it drove away, the subtle changes in his vital signs when Victoria's voice echoed through the house, the quiet dignity with which he bore each disappointment. She quickly closed the notebook, reminding herself of the strict boundaries that needed to be maintained between healthcare provider and patient. Yet as she prepared for bed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing not just a patient's recovery, but the slow unraveling of a marriage, and perhaps, though she dared not admit it even to herself, the beginning of something else entirely. Spring had melted into summer, and the garden of the Hamilton estate bloomed with renewed vigor. Emily had taken to conducting Alex's therapy sessions near the French doors when weather permitted, allowing the warm breeze and the scent of roses to drift in. These moments had become a highlight of their days, a brief escape from the clinical atmosphere that still dominated much of their interactions. Victoria's visits had become so rare that her appearances now caused more disruption than comfort. She would sweep in occasionally, usually during board meetings held in Alex's modified study, playing the role of the devoted wife for the executives who still reported to her husband. Emily observed these performances from a professional distance, noting how Alex's vital signs would fluctuate during these encounters. One particularly warm afternoon, as Emily adjusted Alex's position in his specialized chair, she noticed something different in his expression. His eyes, always expressive, held a new determination. "Would you like to try something new today?" she asked, recognizing the look from other patients who had reached turning points in their recovery. Alex blinked once for yes. Emily positioned herself in front of him, maintaining eye contact. "I've been monitoring your facial muscle responses, and I think we might be ready to attempt some vocal exercises. Would you like that?" The change in his expression was immediate, a mixture of hope and apprehension that made Emily's heart race with professional excitement. "Now, this won't be like regular speech right away," she cautioned, pulling up a chair to sit at his eye level. "We'll start with breathing exercises and small muscle movements. It's going to take time and patience." They worked together for over an hour, Emily guiding Alex through a series of careful breathing exercises designed to strengthen his damaged vocal cords. Though no sound emerged, she could see the effort and determination in every attempt. Their session was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Victoria in the doorway, wearing a tennis outfit and carrying a sports bag. "Oh," she said, seeming startled to find them there. "I just came to pick up some things." Emily straightened professionally. "Mrs. Hamilton, we've just started some new therapeutic exercises. Would you like to learn them? Your participation could be very beneficial to Mr. Hamilton's recovery." Victoria's discomfort was palpable. I have a tennis lesson. Perhaps another time." She glanced at Alex, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I'll be back later, darling." After Victoria left, Emily noticed Alex's breathing had become slightly irregular. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a touch that had become natural over their months working together. "Shall we continue?" she asked softly. That evening, as Emily was preparing to leave, she encountered Margaret in the garden, tending to her roses. "He tried some vocal exercises today," Emily reported, watching as Margaret's face lit up with hope. "That's wonderful news. Did Victoria—" Margaret's voice trailed off as Emily shook her head slightly. "She had a prior engagement," Emily said diplomatically. Margaret's expression hardened slightly as she turned back to her roses. "You know, I've always believed that true character is revealed not in moments of triumph but in times of adversity." She carefully trimmed a wayward stem. "Some people rise to the occasion while others—" She left the thought unfinished, but Emily understood. She had seen it countless times in her career, how illness or injury could either strengthen bonds or expose their fragility. Later that night, in the solitude of her flat, Emily reviewed her notes from the day. Alex's progress with the breathing exercises had been promising, but it was his unwavering determination that struck her most. Despite every setback, despite his wife's growing absence, he pushed forward with a quiet dignity that Emily found increasingly admirable. She caught herself smiling at the memory of their shared triumph when he had managed to maintain the breathing rhythm for a full minute. The way his eyes had crinkled at the corners, showing the ghost of what must once have been a captivating smile. Emily quickly closed her notebook, chiding herself for letting her thoughts wander into unprofessional territory. Yet she couldn't deny the growing warmth she felt in Alex's presence. The way her heart lifted when she saw small signs of his progress, the natural ease that had developed between them despite his limitations. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Thank you for today. You've brought hope back into our home." Emily stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the weight of those words. She had entered the Hamilton household as a medical professional, focused solely on physical rehabilitation. But somewhere along the way she had become something more, a constant in their shifting world, a witness to both tragedy and triumph, and perhaps, though she dared not acknowledge it, a catalyst for change. The summer night air drifted through her open window, carrying with it the faint scent of the city and the whisper of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new exercises, new moments of progress or frustration. But for now, Emily allowed herself to feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was making a difference, even as she carefully guarded the growing feelings she couldn't quite name. The late summer rain drummed against the windows of the Hamilton estate, matching the somber mood that had settled over the household. Victoria stood in the master bedroom, now more medical facility than marital sanctuary, methodically packing items into a Louis Vuitton suitcase, while Alex watched from his bed, his eyes following her every movement. Emily had stepped out momentarily to give them privacy, but remained within earshot. her professional instincts warning her to stay close. From her position in the hallway, she could hear Victoria's attempts at explanation. "You must understand, Alex. This isn't the life I signed up for." Victoria's voice wavered between defensiveness and guilt. "I'm not cut out to be a caretaker. I need more than this." Through the partially open door, Emily could see Alex's vital monitors showing elevated readings. His inability to speak seemed especially cruel at this moment, leaving him unable to respond to his wife's abandonment. Margaret appeared silently beside Emily in the hallway, her face tight with barely contained anger. They both listened as Victoria continued her justifications. "James has offered me a chance at a new life. Away from London, away from all of this." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I know the timing is horrible, but I can't keep pretending. It's killing me inside." The choice of words made Emily wince. She watched as the monitors spiked again, knowing Alex was fighting to maintain his composure, even as his world crumbled around him. "The divorce papers will come through my solicitor," Victoria said, closing her suitcase with a decisive click. "I've already moved most of my things to James's flat. I think it's better this way, cleaner." Finally, Margaret could contain herself no longer. She strode into the room, her voice cold with fury. "Cleaner? You're abandoning my son when he needs you most, and you dare call it cleaner?" Victoria straightened, some of her old confidence returning. "I've made my decision, Margaret. I'm not asking for your approval." "Clearly." Margaret's voice dripped with disdain. "You stopped caring about anyone's approval the moment Alexander couldn't provide you with the lifestyle you'd grown accustomed to." Emily moved quickly to Alex's side, noting his increasing distress. She began checking his vital signs, providing a physical barrier between him and the confrontation unfolding in their bedroom. Victoria gathered her remaining belongings, her movements becoming more hurried. "I've arranged for my things to be collected next week. I'll be in touch through the solicitors." As Victoria moved toward the door, she paused, looking back at Alex one final time. For a moment, her carefully maintained facade cracked, showing a glimpse of genuine regret. "I am sorry, Alex. I truly am." The sound of her heels clicking down the hallway echoed through the house, followed by the distant thud of the front door closing. In the sudden silence, Emily continued her ministrations, professionally checking Alex's readings, while acutely aware of the emotional storm raging beneath his immobile exterior. Margaret sank into a chair, her anger giving way to concern for her son. "Darling, she began, but words failed her. Emily noticed Alex's eyes closing, their signal for needing a moment of privacy. "Mrs. Hamilton," she said softly, "perhaps we could prepare some tea." Understanding passed between the two women, and Margaret nodded, following Emily from the room. In the kitchen, as Emily prepared the tea with practiced movements, Margaret finally broke down. "How dare she?" she whispered fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "After everything they've been through together, everything we've done for her." Emily placed a comforting hand on Margaret's shoulder. "He's stronger than any of us know," she said quietly, "and he has us." Later that evening, after Margaret had retired to the guest room she now frequently occupied, Emily returned to check on Alex before ending her shift. She found him awake, staring out at the rain-streaked windows. "Would you like me to read to you?" she offered, knowing their usual routine might provide some comfort. Alex's eye movement signaled no. "Would you prefer to be alone?" Another no. Emily sat quietly beside him, understanding that sometimes presence meant more than words or actions. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and gradually she noticed Alex's vital signs beginning to stabilize. After a long while, she saw him attempting the breathing exercises they'd been practicing. Understanding dawned. He was trying to communicate. "Take it slowly," she encouraged, leaning closer. "Remember what we practiced." The sound that emerged was barely a whisper, rough from months of disuse, but unmistakable. "Stay." Emily's heart leaped at this breakthrough, even as it broke for the circumstances that had prompted it. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly as she gently squeezed his hand. That night, as Emily drove home through the rain-slicked streets of London, she reflected on the day's events. Victoria's departure, while painful, felt like the lancing of a wound, necessary for true healing to begin. Yet Emily couldn't help but worry about the impact this would have on Alex's recovery, even as she celebrated his first spoken word. In her flat, she made her usual detailed notes about his progress, including this significant breakthrough in speech. But for the first time, she found herself adding a personal observation. Patient shows remarkable emotional resilience in the face of extreme personal distress. His determination to communicate despite circumstances demonstrates exceptional character. She stared at these words for a long moment before closing her notebook, knowing she was walking a dangerous line between professional assessment and personal admiration. Yet, as she prepared for bed, Emily couldn't forget the trust she'd seen in Alex's eyes when he'd asked her to stay, or the way her heart had responded to that simple request. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Emily allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been fighting for weeks. Her feelings for Alexander Hamilton had grown far beyond the bounds of professional concern. This realization both thrilled and terrified her, knowing that the path ahead would require even more careful navigation than before. Autumn painted the Hamilton estate's garden in rich golds and crimsons as Alex's recovery continued to progress. His voice, though still weak, had improved enough to handle short sentences, and his upper body had begun responding to the intensive physical therapy. Each small victory was celebrated by his diminished but devoted circle of support: his parents, the medical team, and most importantly, Emily. The divorce proceedings had begun with predictable media attention. The London social circles buzzed with speculation about Victoria Hamilton's departure with property developer James Cooper, but within the walls of the Chelsea townhouse, a different story was unfolding. One crisp October morning, as Emily assisted Alex with his strengthening exercises, she noticed a new determination in his movements. "I want to try standing," he said, each word carefully formed. Emily assessed him professionally, though she couldn't help but admire his persistence. "Are you sure you're ready? We've only just mastered sitting unassisted." "Ready," he confirmed, his eyes holding that familiar stubborn glint she'd come to know so well. Emily carefully positioned the support equipment they'd need. "Remember, no heroics. We take this slowly." As she helped him into position, Emily was acutely aware of their physical proximity. Alex's body had changed during his recovery. Months of therapy had restored some of his former muscle tone, and his face had regained much of its color and vitality. With careful movements, they began the process. Emily supported him professionally, but she couldn't ignore the electricity that seemed to spark between them as he gripped her shoulders for balance. For a moment, their faces were inches apart, and Emily found herself looking directly into his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying weight beyond this moment. Emily forced herself to maintain professional composure. "You're doing all the hard work," she deflected, adjusting her grip to better support him. The session was interrupted by Margaret's arrival, carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. Her face lit up at the sight of her son standing, albeit with support. "Oh, Alex!" she exclaimed, quickly setting down the tray. "This is wonderful!" The joy in Margaret's voice was infectious, and even Alex managed a small smile, a rare sight that made Emily's heart flutter treacherously. Later that afternoon, as Emily updated Alex's medical charts, Margaret joined her in the study. "The divorce papers arrived today," she said quietly, sitting down heavily in one of the leather armchairs. "Victoria's asking for a surprisingly modest settlement." Emily kept her expression neutral, though her pen paused briefly on the page. "Guilt, perhaps," Margaret continued, more to herself than to Emily. "Or maybe her new life with James Cooper isn't going as planned." Emily finally looked up. "How is Alex handling it?" "Better than any of us expected," Margaret replied, studying Emily thoughtfully. "I think having you here has made all the difference." Emily felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Hamilton." "Are you?" Margaret's voice was gentle but knowing. "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. How he looks at you." Emily's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mrs. Hamilton, Margaret, please," the older woman interrupted. "And don't worry, I'm not judging. In fact, I'm grateful. You've brought life back into this house, into my son's eyes. But I need to know, are your feelings for him genuine?" The question hung in the air between them, demanding honesty. Emily took a deep breath, knowing this conversation could change everything. "They are," she admitted quietly. "But I would never let them interfere with his care or recovery." Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good, because I think he's falling in love with you too, and he deserves someone who truly cares for him, not just what he represents. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard Hamilton, returning from a board meeting at the hotel chain's headquarters. Excellent news, he announced, his face bright with excitement. Alex's latest business proposals, the ones he's been dictating to Emily, have been unanimously approved by the board. They're keeping him on as executive chairman. This victory, small as it might seem to outsiders, represented something massive. Proof that Alex's mind was as sharp as ever, that his business acumen hadn't diminished despite his physical challenges. That evening, as Emily prepared to leave, Alex asked to be moved to the garden for some fresh air. The autumn sunset painted the sky in spectacular shades of pink and orange. As she positioned his wheelchair near the rose garden Margaret had so lovingly maintained. "Emily," he said, his voice stronger in the quiet evening air. "Stay. A moment?" She sat beside him, maintaining a professional distance even as her heart urged her closer. "I'm getting stronger," he said, each word carefully chosen. "Because of you." Emily shook her head. "You're getting stronger because of your own determination, Mr. Hamilton." "Alex," he corrected, managing a small smile. "Please, call me Alex." The simple request felt monumental, like a bridge being crossed. Emily looked at him, seeing not the wealthy businessman she'd first met, nor the patient she'd been caring for, but simply a man, one who had faced adversity with grace and emerged stronger. "Alex," she said softly, testing the name on her lips. The autumn breeze carried the scent of the last roses of the season, and as the sun set over London, something new began to bloom in the garden of the Hamilton estate, something unexpected and beautiful, growing from the ashes of what had been lost. Emily knew she was approaching a crossroads, both professionally and personally, but as she sat beside Alex in the gathering dusk, she realized that some paths, once started upon, were impossible to turn back from. And perhaps, just perhaps, those were the paths most worth taking. Winter had settled over London, transforming the Hamilton estate's garden into a crystalline wonderland. Inside, the house had slowly begun to shed its hospital-like atmosphere as Alex's recovery progressed steadily. The medical equipment remained, but it no longer dominated the space as it once had. Emily's role had gradually shifted from full-time nurse to part-time physical therapist, as Alex had regained significant control over his upper body and continued making progress with his speech. Yet she found herself spending just as much time at the estate, their therapy sessions often extending into long conversations about everything from business strategies to their shared love of classical literature. One snowy afternoon, as they finished a particularly successful therapy session in the newly converted home gym, Alex surprised her with an invitation. "Would you join me for dinner?" he asked, his voice growing stronger each day. "Not as my nurse, as my guest." Emily felt her heart skip a beat, even as professional caution made her hesitate. "Alex, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. I'm not your patient anymore," he reminded her gently. "Not officially, Dr. Roberts signed off last week." It was true. The primary care had been transferred to a visiting physician, with Emily retained only for specialized physical therapy. Still, she wavered. "What would your parents think?" Alex's laugh, though still slightly rough, filled her with warmth. "Mother's been trying to play matchmaker for weeks, haven't you noticed?" Emily had noticed, of course. Margaret's meaningful glances and convenient exits whenever she and Alex were alone together hadn't exactly been subtle. "Just dinner," Alex pressed. "Here at the house, nothing improper." The way he looked at her, hope mingling with something deeper in his eyes, made her defenses crumble. "All right," she agreed softly. "Dinner." That evening, Emily returned to the Hamilton estate feeling distinctly unlike herself. She'd changed from her practical work clothes into a simple blue dress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. Margaret greeted her at the door with a knowing smile. "Alex is in the conservatory," she said, squeezing Emily's hand warmly. "Richard and I are having dinner out tonight. Such a coincidence, isn't it?" The conservatory had been transformed. Soft lighting from strategically placed lamps created a warm glow, and a small table had been set for two near the glass walls that looked out over the snow-covered garden. Alex was already there, seated in his specially designed chair, wearing a crisp shirt that made his eyes look even more striking than usual. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Emily felt herself blush. Dinner was served by the household staff, who disappeared discreetly after ensuring everything was in place. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on their shared experiences over the past months, but also venturing into new territory, their childhood dreams, their hopes for the future. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," Alex admitted, his voice strong enough now to carry emotion. "After the accident, after Victoria left, I thought that part of my life was over." Emily's hand found his across the table. "Life has a way of surprising us." "You surprised me," he said softly. "How your strength, your dedication, your heart. I've never met anyone like you, Emily." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of the doorbell. They heard voices in the hallway, then quick footsteps approaching the conservatory. Victoria Hamilton stood in the doorway, her designer outfit slightly disheveled, her eyes wide as she took in the scene before her. "Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "I've made a terrible mistake." Emily immediately straightened, professional instincts kicking in as she monitored Alex's reaction. But his vital signs remained steady, his expression calm as he regarded his soon-to-be ex-wife. "Victoria," he said clearly, his enhanced speech control evident in the careful pronunciation. "What are you doing here?" "James, he—" Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "It wasn't what I thought it would be. None of it was. I miss our life, Alex. I miss you." Emily moved to stand to give them privacy, but Alex's hand tightened on hers. "Please stay," he said quietly, before turning back to Victoria. "You don't miss me, Victoria. You miss the life we had. There's a difference." Victoria's gaze darted between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Her? The nurse? Really, Alex?" "Emily," he corrected firmly, "saw value in me when I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't offer anything but myself. What does that say about her?" "About you?" Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks. "I know I handled everything badly, but we have history, Alex. 15 years of marriage, and it took less than 15 weeks for you to leave when things got difficult," Alex finished, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not angry anymore, Victoria. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" she whispered. "Yes. Your choices forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. They brought new people into my life who showed me what real loyalty and love look like." His hand squeezed Emily's. "You set me free." Victoria stood there for a long moment, her perfect makeup streaked with tears, before nodding slowly. "I suppose I deserve that. I'll have my solicitor contact yours." After she left, silence settled over the conservatory. Emily looked at Alex, concern evident in her expression. "Are you all right?" To her surprise, he smiled. "Better than all right. For the first time since the accident, I feel completely free. Free to move forward, free to love again." His eyes met hers. "Free to tell you how I feel about you." Emily's heart raced. "Alex, I love you, Emily Bennett. Not because you helped heal me, but because you showed me what real strength looks like, what real love looks like." Outside, snow began to fall again, transforming the winter garden into something magical. Inside the warmth of the conservatory, Emily felt her careful professional boundaries finally crumble completely. "I love you too," she whispered, and the joy that lit up Alex's face made every careful line she'd drawn between them worth crossing. Spring had returned to London, bringing with it new beginnings in more ways than one. The Hamilton estate buzzed with activity as preparations were made for Alex's first public appearance since the accident, a charity gala supporting spinal cord injury research to be held at his flagship hotel. Emily stood in front of the mirror in what had once been Victoria's dressing room, now transformed into her own space. The past few months had brought changes that still sometimes caught her by surprise. Her gradual move into the estate, her resignation from nursing to avoid any professional conflicts, and most importantly, her deepening relationship with Alex. "You look gorgeous," Margaret said from the doorway, admiring Emily's elegant green evening gown. "Though you might want these." She held out a velvet box containing a pair of pearl earrings. "They were my grandmother's. Family tradition." Emily's eyes welled with tears at the gesture. "Margaret, I couldn't—" "Your family now," Margaret insisted, helping her put them on. "Or you will be, once my son works up the courage to make it official. Downstairs, Alex waited in the foyer, cutting an impressive figure in his tailored suit. His recovery had progressed remarkably. He could now stand for short periods and walk short distances with support, though he would use a wheelchair for longer events like tonight's gala. "Ready to face the wolves?" he asked as Emily descended the stairs, his voice strong and clear after months of speech therapy. "The press doesn't scare me," Emily replied, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. This would be their first public appearance as a couple, and she knew the society pages would be watching closely. The drive to the Hamilton Grand was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, camera flashes already lit up the entrance. "Remember," Alex said softly, taking her hand, "you belong here. Not because of me, but because of who you are." The gala itself was a testament to how far they'd come. Alex moved through the crowd with practiced ease in his wheelchair, his natural charisma undiminished as he greeted board members and charity representatives. Emily stayed close, not as a nurse but as his partner, her quiet strength complementing his confident presence. During dinner, Alex was seated next to Sarah Peterson, one of his board members who had been particularly supportive during his recovery. "The new rehabilitation wing at the Edinburgh property is brilliant," Sarah commented, "using hotel space to create a luxury recovery centre. It's revolutionary." Alex smiled, squeezing Emily's hand under the table. "It was Emily's idea, actually. She showed me how recovery doesn't have to mean sacrificing dignity or comfort." The evening progressed smoothly until a familiar face appeared at their table. James Cooper stood there, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Alexander," he said formally, "I wanted to apologize. What happened with Victoria is in the past," Alex finished firmly. "We've all moved on." James nodded, his eyes flickering to Emily before he retreated back into the crowd. Later, they learned from another guest that his property development company was struggling, and Victoria had taken a job as an events coordinator at a rival hotel chain. "Are you all right?" Emily asked softly as they shared a quiet moment on the hotel's terrace. Alex smiled, pulling her closer. "You know what's strange? I genuinely hope they find happiness. I have everything I need right here." The sound of clinking glass called them back inside. It was time for Alex's speech, a moment many had been waiting for. With Emily's subtle support, Alex stood at the podium, his voice clear and strong as he addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I had lost my mobility, my voice, my wife, but what seemed like an ending turned out to be a beginning. Through this experience, I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. True love isn't in standing by someone in their triumph, but in helping them stand when they can't stand alone." His eyes found Emily's in the crowd as he continued, "The new rehabilitation wing at our Edinburgh hotel is just the beginning. The Hamilton Hotel Group is committed to creating spaces where recovery doesn't mean isolation, where healing can happen with dignity, because everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. I found mine, and I want to help others find theirs." The applause was thunderous, but Alex only had eyes for Emily. As he made his way back to their table, supported by his cane, he reached into his pocket, fingering the small velvet box he'd been carrying all evening. Later that night, in the rooftop garden of the Hamilton Grand, under a canopy of stars, Alex would ask Emily to marry him. And as she said yes, both of them knew that their story wasn't about an accident that changed everything, or about a wife who left, or even about a nurse who helped heal a broken man. It was about two people who found each other when they least expected it, who helped each other become stronger, better versions of themselves. It was about second chances, about rising above adversity, and about the kind of love that doesn't flee when times get tough, but grows stronger in the face of challenges. The London night sparkled around them, full of promise and possibility, as they began writing the next chapter of their story together. The small bistro in Notting Hill buzzed with the typical lunch crowd energy. Emily sat across from Margaret, surrounded by wedding planning materials spread across their table. The past few months had been a whirlwind of preparations, but today's meeting had a different purpose. "Are you sure about this?" Margaret asked, her protective instincts evident in her tone. "We could easily choose another venue for the rehearsal dinner." Emily shook her head, her fingers tracing the edge of a sample menu. "Victoria works here now. We need to face this situation head-on with grace." The bistro, Le Petit Jardin, had built a reputation for its intimate atmosphere and excellent cuisine, despite its modest appearance. That Victoria Hamilton now worked here as a hostess was a fact that had reached them through London's ever-active social grapevine. Alex agrees, Emily continued. He says it's important to close this chapter properly before we start our new one. Their conversation paused as a familiar figure approached their table. Victoria looked different, her designer clothes replaced by a simple black dress, her once perfect makeup more subdued, yet she carried herself with a dignity that surprised them both. Mrs. Hamilton, Miss Bennet, Victoria said professionally, though her voice wavered slightly. Welcome to Le Petit Jardin. Margaret's expression softened as she observed her former daughter-in-law. The anger she'd harbored had gradually given way to something closer to pity. Hello, Victoria, Emily responded warmly. We'd like to discuss hosting an event here. Victoria's professional facade cracked slightly. The rehearsal dinner, I heard about the engagement. Congratulations. The sincerity in her voice was unexpected. She hesitated before continuing. I can arrange for another hostess to handle your event if you'd prefer. Actually, Emily said gently, we'd like you to be involved, if you're comfortable with it. Victoria sank into an empty chair, her composure finally breaking. Why? After everything I did. Because forgiveness is stronger than bitterness, Margaret interjected softly. And because it's time we all moved forward. As they discussed the arrangements, Emily observed the changes in Victoria. Gone was the brittle socialite who had fled from difficulty. In her place was a woman who had learned hard lessons about pride and consequences. James and I, Victoria ventured hesitantly, we didn't last long after everything. He found someone younger, wealthier. Ironic, isn't it? Neither Emily nor Margaret commented, allowing Victoria this moment of vulnerability. The owner here, Jean-Pierre, he gave me a chance when no one else would, Victoria continued. Said everyone deserves an opportunity to rebuild. I'm learning to stand on my own feet for the first time in my life. As they finalized the details for the dinner, Victoria gathered her courage to ask about Alex. How is he? Really? Emily smiled warmly. He's thriving. The rehabilitation centers in the hotels are changing lives. He's found his purpose again, but different from before, more meaningful. Victoria nodded, blinking back tears. I see him sometimes, in the business news. The photos. He looks happy. You make him happy. We make each other happy, Emily corrected gently. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns to get us where we need to be. As they prepared to leave, Victoria touched Emily's arm lightly. Thank you, she said softly, for being what he needed, what I couldn't be. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of wedding preparations, but Emily's mind kept returning to their encounter with Victoria. When she returned to the Hamilton estate that evening, she found Alex in his study, reviewing plans for their newest rehabilitation center. How did it go? He asked, setting aside his papers. Emily settled into her favorite chair beside his desk. Better than expected. She's changed, Alex. Found her own way. Alex nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find ourselves. He reached for her hand. I know I did. The setting sun cast long shadows through the study windows, reminding Emily of that first morning, over a year ago, when she'd entered this house as a nurse, never imagining how completely her life would change. Are you sure about having the rehearsal dinner there? She asked. It's not too late to change venues. Alex's smile was warm and sure. Some circles need to be closed before new ones can begin. Besides, he added, his eyes twinkling, I hear the food is excellent. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in the garden where they'd first admitted their feelings, Emily marveled at how life had brought them all to this point. Victoria finding humility and independence, Alex discovering new purpose through adversity, and she herself learning that sometimes the greatest love stories come disguised as something else entirely. The spring breeze carried the scent of new roses, Margaret's latest botanical triumph, and promises of the future yet to come. Tomorrow would bring more wedding preparations, more rehabilitation center plans, more steps forward in their journey together. But for now, they simply enjoyed the peace of the moment, knowing that every challenge they'd faced had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The evening of the rehearsal dinner arrived on a perfect June evening. Le Petit Jardin had been transformed, its intimate charm enhanced by soft lighting and elegant floral arrangements. Victoria had outdone herself with the preparations, every detail attended to with meticulous care. The guests began arriving, family, close friends, and key members of the Hamilton Hotel Group board. Emily watched from a quiet corner as Victoria gracefully guided them to their seats, her professional composure never wavering despite the emotional weight of the evening. "She's handling it well," Margaret observed, joining Emily at her vantage point. "Better than I expected." Alex arrived slightly later, having come directly from a board meeting. His walk was strong now, the cane used more for security than necessity. He paused briefly when he saw Victoria, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away between them. "Welcome to Le Petit Jardin, Mr. Hamilton," Victoria said formally, but with genuine warmth. "Your table is ready." "Thank you, Victoria," he replied kindly. "The place looks wonderful." As the evening progressed, Emily observed the subtle interactions playing out around her. Richard Hamilton, initially tense at seeing his former daughter-in-law, gradually relaxed as he witnessed her changed demeanor. Board members who had known Victoria in her socialite days watched with varying degrees of surprise as she efficiently managed the service with quiet dignity. During the main course, Alex stood to address their guests. His voice, now fully recovered, carried clearly through the restaurant. "A year and a half ago, I thought I had lost everything," he began, his eyes finding Emily's. "My mobility, my voice, my sense of purpose. But life has a way of showing us that endings are often disguised beginnings." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, including Victoria. "Every person in this room played a part in my journey. Some taught me about resilience," he smiled at his parents, "others about unconditional love." His eyes returned to Emily. "And yes, some taught me that sometimes we need to lose our way to find a better path." Victoria, standing discreetly by the service station, brushed away a tear. "Tomorrow I marry the woman who showed me that true strength isn't in never falling, but in how we rise." Emily didn't just help me heal physically. She helped me become a better man, a stronger person, someone worthy of the kind of love she offers. The dinner continued, filled with warm conversations and genuine laughter. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria approached their table during a quiet moment. "I have something for you," she said softly, placing a small package before them. "A wedding gift of sorts." Inside was a framed photograph, not of their past together, but of the new rehabilitation centre at the Edinburgh Hotel. The inscription read, "Sometimes our greatest failures lead to others' greatest successes. Thank you for turning our ending into something beautiful." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes as Alex reached for Victoria's hand. "Join us for a moment?" he asked. Victoria sat, her composure finally cracking slightly. "I want you both to know, seeing you together, seeing what you've built from what I destroyed, it's helped me find peace with my choices, my mistakes." "Not mistakes," Emily corrected gently. "Stepping stones. They led us all where we needed to be." Later that night, as they walked through the moonlit garden of their home, Alex pulled Emily close. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I have to admit, I never expected to feel grateful to Victoria." Alex chuckled softly. "Life's greatest revenge is living well, they say. But perhaps the sweetest revenge is finding happiness in unexpected places and having the grace to share it with those who led us there, even unintentionally." The garden was filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine, another of Margaret's additions to celebrate their upcoming wedding. Tomorrow would bring their special day, the beginning of their official life together. But tonight they had achieved something equally valuable. They had made peace with the past, transforming old wounds into bridges toward a brighter future. As they stood together under the stars, Emily reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led them here. From nurse and patient, to friends, to lovers, to partners in life and purpose. Their story wasn't just about recovery or redemption. It was about the extraordinary power of love to transform lives, heal hearts, and create something beautiful from life's greatest challenges. The night enveloped them in its gentle embrace, promising more adventures, more challenges, more opportunities to grow together. And in the quiet of their garden, surrounded by the blooms that had witnessed their love story unfold, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The morning of the wedding dawned with the kind of perfect summer weather that seemed almost too good to be true. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Hamilton estate, where Emily stood in what had once been Victoria's dressing room, now transformed with her own touches. Margaret fussed with the elaborate train of Emily's elegant but understated wedding gown. "Something old," Margaret said, adjusting the pearl earrings she'd given Emily at the gala. "Something new," she continued, helping Emily fasten a delicate diamond necklace, Alex's wedding gift. "Something borrowed." She draped a vintage lace handkerchief into Emily's hands. "And something blue," she finished, pointing to the tiny blue forget-me-nots woven into Emily's bouquet. There was a gentle knock at the door, and Victoria entered hesitantly, wearing the same simple elegance she'd displayed at the rehearsal dinner. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. "I just wanted to wish you well before heading to work." Emily turned, surprising Victoria with a warm embrace. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." Victoria pulled back, blinking away tears. "You know, I used to think happiness was about having the right status, the right lifestyle. You taught me it's about having the right heart." She squeezed Emily's hands. "Take care of him." "We take care of each other," Emily corrected gently. After Victoria left, Emily caught Margaret wiping away tears. "That's what growth looks like," the older woman said proudly. "All of us, learning, changing, becoming better versions of ourselves." The ceremony was held in the Hamilton Estate's garden, where their love had first blossomed. The space had been transformed into an enchanted wonderland, with roses and wisteria creating natural arches over the guests. Alex waited at the altar, standing proud and strong, using his cane more for appearance than necessity now. Richard Hamilton escorted Emily down the aisle, having stepped into the role when they learned Emily's own father couldn't travel due to health issues. As they approached, Emily saw tears in Alex's eyes, tears of joy, of triumph, of love. The celebrant spoke of journeys, of how love often comes in unexpected packages, of how the strongest bonds are forged through adversity. But Emily and Alex barely heard the words, lost in each other's eyes in the miracle of their shared path. "When I first met you," Alex said in his vows, his voice clear and strong, "I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't offer you anything but a broken version of myself. You saw past all that to the man I could become. You didn't just help me heal, you helped me transform. You showed me that true strength isn't in never needing help, but in having the courage to accept it. That true love isn't about perfect moments, but perfect understanding." Emily's voice trembled as she delivered her own vows. "You think I saved you, but you saved me too. You showed me that love isn't just about caring for someone, it's about growing together, challenging each other, becoming better versions of ourselves. You took a nurse who lived for her work and showed her how to live for love, for joy, for the endless possibilities of tomorrow." The reception was held in the ballroom of the Hamilton Grand, the hotel where they'd first appeared as a couple. The space glittered with elegant decorations, but the real beauty was in the joy that filled the room. Board members mingled with medical staff from the rehabilitation centers, all united in celebration of a love story that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire business model. Sarah Peterson, now CEO of the Hamilton Hotel Group's rehabilitation division, raised her glass in a toast. "To the couple who showed us that the greatest luxury we can offer isn't in thread counts or champagne brands, but in helping people rebuild their lives with dignity and hope." As they shared their first dance, Alex held Emily close, moving with the fluid grace that months of therapy had restored. "Happy," he whispered in her ear. "Beyond words," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. The evening passed in a blur of congratulations, laughter, and love. As the celebration wound down, they found a quiet moment in the rooftop garden where Alex had proposed. "Look," Emily said, pointing to a shooting star streaking across the London sky. "Make a wish," Alex suggested. Emily shook her head, smiling. "I already have everything I could wish for." The London night sparkled around them, full of promise and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new triumphs, new opportunities to grow together. But for now, they simply held each other, two hearts beating as one, ready to write the next chapter of their extraordinary love story. In the garden below, Margaret's roses bloomed under the starlight, their sweet fragrance a reminder of how beauty can grow from the most unexpected circumstances, and how love, when nurtured with patience and understanding, can transform not just two lives, but touch countless others in its gentle wake. 5 years had passed since the wedding that had united not just two people, but two visions of what life and love could be. The Hamilton estate's garden bloomed with late summer flowers, their colors made more vibrant by the laughter of a young child chasing butterflies among the roses. "Careful, James," Emily called out to their 4-year-old son, named after Alex's grandfather. The boy had inherited his father's determination and his mother's gentle heart, a combination that kept them both constantly on their toes. Alex watched from the terrace, no longer needing his cane except on particularly tiring days. The Hamilton Hotel Group had expanded its rehabilitation centers across Europe, becoming as well known for their medical care as their luxury accommodations. Each center bore the warmth and personal touch that had characterized Emily's care for Alex, a perfect blend of professional excellence and human compassion. "Daddy, look!" James called out, proudly holding up a perfectly formed rose petal. "For Grandma's collection." Margaret, who had recently published a book on therapeutic gardening, scooped up her grandson with practiced ease. Her gardens had become an integral part of their rehabilitation programs, offering patients a peaceful space to heal both body and spirit. The sound of car tires on gravel announced visitors. Richard Hamilton emerged from his car, followed by Sarah Peterson, and to everyone's surprise, Victoria. "Hope we're not interrupting," Richard called out. "We had a board meeting about the new centre in Paris, and Victoria's venue recommendations were too good not to share immediately." Victoria had transformed Le Petit Jardin into one of London's most sought-after restaurants, eventually buying out the owner when he retired. Her expertise in hospitality, combined with her newfound understanding of life's deeper values, had made her an invaluable consultant for the Hamilton Group's rehabilitation centres. "Uncle James is taking me to ballet," young James announced to Victoria, who had become surprisingly a favourite honorary aunt. "Is he now?" Victoria smiled, referring to her former partner James Cooper, who had found his own path to redemption. After his business failures, he had rebuilt his life on a smaller but more meaningful scale, now running a successful children's dance studio. Emily watched the interactions with a full heart. Time had smoothed the rough edges of past hurts, transforming former wounds into wisdom, past rivals into friends. The monthly family dinners at Le Petit Jardin had become a tradition, celebrating not just their individual successes, but their collective journey. Later that evening, after James had been tucked into bed with stories of butterflies and roses, Alex and Emily sat in their favorite spot in the garden. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how far we've all come," Emily mused, her hand intertwined with his. "Remember what you told Victoria at our wedding?" Alex asked. "Not mistakes, stepping stones." "You were right. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of pain led us exactly where we needed to be." The Hamilton Group's latest project was their most ambitious yet, a comprehensive rehabilitation resort in the Scottish Highlands, combining medical excellence with the healing power of nature. The concept had been inspired by their own journey, by the understanding that true healing involved not just the body, but the heart and soul as well. Young James's laughter echoed from his bedroom window, probably negotiating one more story from Margaret, and Emily felt tears of joy prick her eyes. "You know," Alex said softly, "when I had my accident, I thought everything was ending. I never imagined it was just the beginning of something so much more beautiful." The London evening settled around them, soft and warm with promise. In the distance, they could see the lights of the city where their story had begun, where a nurse had walked into a patient's room and started a chain of events that would transform not just their lives, but countless others. Their journey had shown them that love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the quiet strength found in supporting each other through challenges. It was about seeing beauty in imperfection, finding courage in vulnerability, and recognizing that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its greatest challenges. The garden bloomed around them, Margaret's roses releasing their sweet fragrance into the night air. Each flower represented a memory, a triumph, a moment of growth in their shared journey. And like those roses, their love had grown stronger with each passing season, nurtured by understanding, strengthened by challenges, and blooming ever more beautifully with time. As they sat together under the starlit sky, surrounded by the life they had built together, They knew that their story wasn't just about recovery or redemption. It was about the transformative power of love, love that heals, love that builds, love that turns endings into beginnings and strangers into family. The future stretched before them, full of new possibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to grow together. But they would face it as they had faced everything else, side by side, heart to heart, their love a beacon of hope, not just for each other, but for all who witnessed their extraordinary journey. In the end, their story had come full circle, though not back to where it began. Instead, it had spiraled upward, reaching new heights of joy, understanding, and purpose. And in that circle of love, they had found not just happiness, but something far more precious, the deep contentment of knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly who they were meant to be with. A shooting star streaked across the London sky, but neither of them needed to make a wish. They already had everything they could ever dream of, and more importantly, they had the wisdom to recognize it, cherish it, and share it with others. Their love story had become more than just their own. It had become a testament to the power of second chances, the strength found in vulnerability, and the endless possibilities that open up when two hearts find their way to each other against all odds.